Oh, that's right, Milton, that's right. She said you can forget what you write. I have a wonderful speaker for you. Her name is Dr. Phyllis Hall. And she's going to talk a little bit more on this dementia. And she would like your questions. Otherwise, she's going to talk on the symptoms that you might see with this disease.
We got to take notes.
You can do the notes if you want. Yeah, there is a test.
Well, I got to take
That's why
notes.
we're leaving early.
If you remember the...
Remember right
So, Dr. Palm, would you like to? Yeah? You may come join us wherever you'd like to. Phyllis is a good friend. She tells me the good and the bad about me.
How about everybody?
She's a
I'm not a
psychologist.
person who keeps my thoughts or my feelings to myself. As you can see, I have written a book. And the reason I wrote a book is because I wanted to share with other people the difficult time that I had. And as an educated woman, it shouldn't have been so hard for me to understand that my husband was developing an illness. And I really didn't understand it. And then when I started getting abuse from him, verbal abuse from him, I couldn't understand that either because he was always such a sweet, generous, loving person. And I thought I had done something wrong. I thought I had done something to make him mad at me. And so I wrote this book, and you have a postcard of this book on each table. So you can take it, and if at some point you're interested in purchasing a book, you can do that. There will be something in here that I will read for you, but first I have a question for you. On a sheet of paper or in your head, I want from 1 to 10, with number 10 being the highest and number 1 being the lowest. I'd like you to think, how important is Alzheimer's disease today? 10. Anybody else? 10. How many people know someone who has had some form of dementia or Alzheimer's disease? Wow. And how many of you are afraid that it might happen to you someday? And that's what we're here to talk about. Right? And you have what the symptoms are that are written up on the wall all over the room. And I would like to talk to you about what's normal aging. What is it that we all do? Like someone says you're going to forget what you wrote down. Well, that's a joke, okay? We do these senior jokes all the time. We make fun of ourselves. I saw a cartoon just yesterday online where a man is speaking to the waiter in a restaurant, and he says to the waiter, "Do I come here often?" So we make jokes, not to make fun of getting older, but as we are all part of that same generation, we can all make fun of ourselves. It's just we make fun of somebody else, then that's not funny. Right? So that when we see somebody in a restaurant or in church who is acting inappropriately, we have to really have some patience and some understanding that quite often in our age group, it's not someone who's being inappropriate on purpose. It's being inappropriate because they've forgotten how to hold back those thoughts and feelings that normally we don't share with others. So we have to be careful. And when we see somebody in a restaurant or on the street, and we see that one person is holding the other person's hand, but not like a couple who is lovingly holding hands walking down the street, but more like one is holding the other more like a child, more guarding the other person. We kind of recognize that they are having this issue. And if you go up to the person and you smile and you say, I know what's going on, I know what you're dealing with, and if I can be of any help to you, please let me know. That makes all the difference in the world. And I did that a few years ago when I was collecting information for my book. I was in Safeway the day before Thanksgiving because I hadn't remembered ingredients from my husband's favorite Jell-O mold. We make every year Bob's favorite Thanksgiving Jell-O mold, and I had to find the Bing cherries. And I had forgotten. And I went into the supermarket by myself. I left him home by himself and ran to the supermarket in my car and drove over there really fast because I couldn't leave him alone very long anymore. And I see this man, beautiful head of white hair, strong, tall, assertive man, walking with the cart in the grocery aisle. And a woman quietly, tenderly walking about a half of aisle behind him. And he said, "Come along, Shirley. Come along, dear." And I looked at him and I smiled. I knew what was happening in his family. And after going to the next aisle, because I couldn't find the Bing cherries, I went over to him and I said, "You know, I don't know you, sir, but I feel sorry. I have empathy for you because we're going through the same thing. We're in the same place in our lives, you and I." And he said, "Thank you so much for coming up to me." And I, I nodded my head because I didn't think it was that big a deal. Right? He said, when you heard me say, "Come along, Shirley," I thought you thought I was being condescending to my wife and that you were looking at me with disrespect, not with respect. And so people they misunderstand, and people who are caregivers for someone with dementia and Alzheimer's disease are very sensitive to what other people think of them and think about them and how we approach them. So he was so delighted that I went and said to him, of course I then went further since I don't keep my mouth shut, as everybody knows. And I said, "Sir," I said, "I'm writing a book about people who are taking care of their loved ones who have Alzheimer's disease, and my husband has the same thing. Could I hear your story? Is there any way that you would share your story with me?" And he said, "Sure." And I gave him one of my cards, and he said, "I'll call you after the holiday." And I went home and I got the Bing cherries and I did my Thanksgiving meal, and Bob forgot how to make gravy. My husband was the cook in our family. And so he's standing there and he doesn't remember how to do it. So my daughter's mother-in-law said, "I'll help you." And very nicely and graciously she got up and stirred the cornstarch into the pan juices and added some soup, and we had a wonderful gravy and a lovely dinner. But he didn't understand, who are all these people that you invited? Why are they all here? When did they die? Oh. So it was a difficult day. And the next day I was so surprised that this man called me up and he said, "It's Leon." I don't know, who's Leon? "You met me in the supermarket yesterday." And I said I would be willing to share my story with you. And then I didn't know what to do. I'm not going to meet a stranger in a restaurant someplace. I can't leave my husband. He can't leave his wife. How am I going to do the next thing? So I did the next best thing. Is I invited them to come over for tea. Okay? And they said yes, and they came over for tea. And my husband's rough face. He doesn't say a word, not one word. They come in. I watch them park the car, and he opens the door for Shirley, and he helps her out of the car. He closes the door. He's walking up slowly up the walkway. He takes her sweater off for her, and he puts it over a chair for her. And when we sat down for tea, he squeezed the lemon into her teacup. He opened the orange. The first thing, I like to do, it was November, as you see, is have the first oranges in Arizona. I love the oranges in Arizona as soon as you can get them. And I had little tea cakes, and he helped her. He cut up her orange. He was just very solicitous to Shirley. And Shirley was sweet, and Shirley was kind, and Shirley was very polite. My husband's saying, finally, he says, "Let's let these women to themselves. Come out with me to the garage." He takes Leon. Not great, because Shirley can't be for 5 minutes So Shirley is really anxious with me. She's looking all around. She's looking all around. And so I said, why don't we go out into the garage and see where Leon is and see, he didn't go very far because if he isn't right in front of her, she's lost him. She doesn't know that he exists anymore and that she's totally all alone. And so I noticed that she was another stage further in the development of her illness than my husband had been at that moment in his. And we went out into the garage, and then Leon said, I think I'll take Shirley home now. There was the end of my story. I don't have a story because I didn't have any time to speak with Leon about what was going on in their lives. So I asked Leon to meet me at the Mesa Multi-Generational Center, see if he could find someone. He lived in a mobile home community, and they were Canadians, and they came here. I think it's Mountain View that they lived in, close by. And there were neighbors that sometimes would watch his wife, invite her over for tea or coffee in the morning, whom she knew and with whom she could be comfortable for a few hours. And he came to the Multi-Generational Center, and we sat there, and he told me his story. The next year, he has not come down from Canada to be here, so perhaps he was able to have her placed in a residential facility, because she got to the point, we went to the Multi-Generational Center has an Alzheimer support group, and I brought Leon to the Alzheimer support group, and he was able to share his problems because he wanted to know, what do you do? My wife doesn't recognize herself in the mirror, and she thinks that I have strange women coming to visit me. She's also afraid to change her clothes in the bathroom because somebody's always watching her. And in their home, and in many homes, the bedroom closets take up one whole wall, and they're mirrored. And there's no way to hang a sheet or anything over them. You have to open the doors all the time to get your clothing out. And so she was really miserable, but she did not understand that. And he also was asking bathroom questions that he never before had anybody to ask what to do. He didn't know what to do about taking care of her in the bathroom. So it was very important for him to have, and for me, for all of us, to have a support group to go to have some place to talk about things that bother you. If you are the caregiver of somebody with Alzheimer's disease, or if you know somebody who is a caregiver with Alzheimer's disease. And many of you, maybe some people in this room too, live in a community where there are neighbors, where there are people that you could be helpful to with this issue. And the reason I stress it is because we usually shy away from illness. It's just human nature. When we see something going wrong, it's not the first thing we do to jump in to help because we don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. We don't want to insult somebody. We don't want to hurt somebody's feelings unnecessarily. And it's really hard. Just like after somebody passes, we don't exactly know what to say because either we've been there and then we may know a little bit better what to say, or we feel a little guilty that we're not there yet and our spouses or loved ones are safe, and then we don't know what to say either. Sorry for your loss, but thank God it's not me. It's really hard. So please, the first and most important message that I have is to please be kind to someone that you know who is caring for someone who has Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia, because the stresses that they go through are really difficult. Okay, now about us. What is normal aging? Forgetting what we wrote down on a piece of paper, forgetting our keys, right? What other things do we do that we didn't do before or that we used to do and we don't do?
Go to the garage and wonder why we're there.
What did I come here for? Exactly. Go from one room into the other and say, gee, and then you go back to the first room and then you say, oh, I remember. Okay, that's normal aging. All right, that's that's something we all do, and we do it at 35 as well as at 75, but we get scared about it at 75, or we didn't get scared about it as much at 35. But we all do those things. We all make these little forgetful things that we forget our keys, or we don't remember to buy the milk that we went purposely to the store to get. We drive away, oh, I forgot to get the milk. Right? All of those things are normal things that people do in life. What happens with, what? You're normal? Yay! We got one normal person.
Because she'll say, well, you didn't get the milk that you were going to get. And I say, well, so I'll go back.
Right. That's another thing about accepting who we are at whatever age we are. Some people that I know, healthy people in their 80s, 90s, even a few people who are over 100 years old, live the lives that they used to live, but they live them at a slower pace, and they do their activities for a shorter amount of time, and then they take a rest. And then they go back to doing whatever it was before. Some people, instead of watching a 2.5-hour movie, watch an hour show on TV. One lady I know, she just fell in love with the reruns of Law and Order. Why? Because those shows have a beginning, they have a middle, they have an end. They have a problem, they have different ways of solving it, then they have a resolution. It's reassuring, all right, for somebody who is having problems organizing their own lives to see a show on TV that is so well structured that generally they have a good moral at the end too. They have issues that the news and other places, these stories are actually pulled from the newspaper in order to write. So that other people, instead of cooking elaborate meals, cook more simple meals, eat out more often, and when they are entertaining, they don't necessarily invite somebody over for dinner. They invite them over for tea. Right? And they do their dinners more simply. They live their lives a little bit easier than they did earlier in their lives, which is perfectly fine and perfectly normal. What is important with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias is that we generally don't notice it on ourselves. All right? If you are going to be having Alzheimer's disease or other dementias, other people are going to notice it for you. And sometimes your spouse doesn't, like me, your spouse doesn't notice it very quickly either. And if it is your spouse, or if you're an adult child living with your parents, you kind of make excuses for them. And you don't want to know that what you're observing is really maybe normal, not really normal, okay? And other people will say, I think it's time to check with the physician. It's hardly ever ourselves that say, I'm going to go to a neurologist, I think I have Alzheimer's. No, because our thinking is one of the first things to go. Our rational thinking, our decision-making ability, our judgment. And when I see people who are driving their car, even to an Alzheimer's support group, because the spouse is coming and he's the KOI, but he's driving, it frightens me, because it's not that driving is 80% automatic, right? You really don't have to think anymore. You don't have to shift. You don't have to have a clutch. You don't have to do all the difficult things of driving. Just to sit behind the wheel, steer it, put your foot on the gas, and remember to put your foot on the brake every once in a while. But the other people on the road do things that are unpredictable. And reaction time as we get older is much slower, even if the reasoning and judgment are there. But if the reasoning and judgment aren't there, you can see that accidents can result. Even in this beautiful, wonderful weather where we have these wide roads and long on and off ramps, it should be so easy to drive safely, and really nice left-hand turn lanes. It should be easy to drive safely, and yet you hear on the radio all the time so many accidents on the road. And some of them may be caused by people who should no longer be driving. And it's really hard to make that decision. All right, now I'm going to ask you questions because I'm sure you have a lot of them, because I've said that we usually don't think about ourselves as having a problem. We think about other people as having a problem. So who is it in your life that you're concerned about that you would like to ask a question to?
Well, my mother had Alzheimer's,
Uh-huh.
and she developed it late in her life. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if I didn't follow in her footsteps.
Me too. My mother had Alzheimer's late in her life too, from 80 to 88, and I'm also concerned. So how do I prevent myself, or what's the best thing I can do? I can eat well. I can exercise. I can exercise my brain. And you are doing that right now by crocheting. You're exercising your brain. Anything that we do, playing cards exercises our brain. All right? Reading a book exercises our brain. All right? Doing puzzles, playing Wii bowling, all exercises our brain. I know. And it keeps us healthy. Yes?
Do they have any statistics on how you are going to know, like my mother, her brother, her sister all had dementia? Is it inevitable?
No, it's not inevitable, but you don't even want to know. The tests are not conclusive. They can tell you if you have a gene that gives you a larger possibility of having dementia, but it can't predict it. I wish there were some that could, but then again, if there were, do I want to know?
Oh, I just
If there's
keep telling
nothing
my
I
kids
can
to let
do.
me know if I'm doing something wrong, because I live with this knowledge with my mother.
Right, right. And I lived with that knowledge, well, I didn't live with my mother, okay? And so, I got married when my mom was I got remarried to my current husband when my mom was about 78. And she started calling me at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. When you have a new husband, that's not exactly appropriate. And she would call me up with questions like, what's rubbernecking? She says, they're doing that on the Cross Bronx Expressway. Rubbernecking. What is that? That's when the traffic is stalled because there's an accident over there that everybody's slowing down to see what's happening. What?
And causing another
And causing huge traffic tie-ups on the city highways in the morning. And so she would call and ask these kinds of questions. One year we were in Europe. And the phone rings at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it's my mother. She didn't realize there was a time difference, and she wasn't calling about anything difficult, you know. So there were signs that I was a little faster to pick up on my mom's signs than I was on my husband's signs, even though I had already had that experience. Another question. Yes, ma'am.
What do you do with children who are in denial about your situation? My kids think I can do anything and everything.
They're probably right.
And there are things that I cannot do anymore. And I'll say to Steve, I have my handicaper with me. Oh, he said, Mom, you walk so good. And he parks a mile away from her. And I don't walk that well anymore. My hips are shot. But what do you do to make kids realize that there are some things you cannot do?
Not like they used to be.
And I'll say, oh, I forgot all about that. And he'll say, you never forget anything. I don't know.
I know. My son's like that too, because he's dependent on me to be strong.
Yeah.
And they've always been able to count on you to be the strong one.
I think we all do.
I wish he was little
Because
so
I
I could
used to
slap
try to
him
make
around.
my mother remember and then I was doing harm.
paper last week, it had that Alzheimer's was the third largest and growing for death.
That's right, it's the third
Heart,
most frequent cause of death in the United States
heart
now.
and cancer, but I
Right.
mean, what terminates their lifespan? What, just, is it various things, or?
A, it's various things. B, the reason that it's now got elevated up to third is because the physicians refuse to put Alzheimer's disease on the death certificate. They put kidney failure, they put other things, they put diabetes, they put anything they could think of, arterial sclerosis, right, hardening of the arteries, and they refuse to put Alzheimer's disease as a cause of death.
What of Alzheimer's causes the death?
However, you cannot diagnose Alzheimer's exactly unless by autopsy.
Wow.
And that's why they refused to put it on the death certificate, because they couldn't prove that it was Alzheimer's. So now they're saying, hey, the person, the most proximate cause of death in Alzheimer's is when a person forgets how to swallow. When they forget how to swallow, they forget how to eat, they starve to death. They choke if you put food in their mouth, so they get nothing by mouth, and they can't. And then, of course, the kidneys fail many times. And as the whole system begins to stop functioning, the person gets closer and closer to death. Sometimes people fall, people with Alzheimer's fall, hit their head, break their hip, whatever, and then they don't recover from that because the body, again, is in a very frail condition and doesn't have the resources to come back from a blow or a fall or an illness. Sometimes they die from pneumonia because the body can't reconstruct itself after an illness like that. But it is the gradual deterioration of the brain, and the brain controls everything we do. And it generally hits the motor function last, so that they're walking around until quite near the end. My husband is still walking around, and he plays catch with me, and then if I miss, because I miss more frequently than he does, he walks over where the ball is, stoops down without any assistance, picks the ball up, and throws it back to me. So motor skills are still good. His speech is not good. He hardly recognizes me. He did yesterday. I showed him. He walked over to his dresser, picked up the picture, and I said, "Who's that?" He looks. He says, "Me." I said, "Yeah, that's you." I said, "Who's that next to you?" "Is that you?" I said, "Yes." And "Who's that third person?" He's bumpering around. I said, "That's Steve. That's my son Steve. And we're a good team, aren't we?" And he says, "Yes." But then he's off, mumbling about something I don't understand.
I understand that the Banner has an Alzheimer's study.
It has an institute where they do a lot of studies, and they really look for candidates for research projects. Even people whose parents or siblings have had Alzheimer's and they are interested in being part of a clinical study, and if you wanted to see that if you were a candidate for that, I'm sure they would absolutely love having candidates to go for this. You go online to Banner Alzheimer Institute, or you can call them up, Banner Alzheimer Institute, and say you're interested in an application for clinical study. You have relatives who've had this disease, and you're interested in helping to be part of the research. They are researching now people from Colombia who have a very high genetic propensity for Alzheimer's disease, and they're finding in their studies that they have seen signs of Alzheimer's disease in people as young as 24.
So the reason I asked that question is my oldest daughter's mother-in-law is now living with them, and she is dementia. They have already said she's got end of organ issues.
Oh, see, she's got end of organ issues. All right, so the kidneys aren't working well, the digestive system's not working well, maybe the circulatory system's not working well, her feet are cold, her hands are cold.
So I was wondering if this was a possibility that they could engage, because my daughter and her husband both work, so right now they're in healthcare.
In every section section of the country, there is a federal project called Area Agency on Aging. Always have a hard time saying it because it's such a terrible name for this organization. And Mary has all the telephone numbers and the book, and she can help you with that because there are regional ones in every area of the country, and they can help with that kind of assistance.
She's to the point now where she's quite outspoken.
Oh yeah. Inhibition gets loosened. Can you imagine what's going to happen to me when I get Alzheimer's?
She
Oh
comes
my
up with
goodness.
some comments that will
Whoa.
make your hair curl.
And sometimes these very sweet ladies
Yes.
come out cursing like a sailor. All of that language is in there somewhere, and it's not like they never knew it. Out it comes, appropriately or not.
Well, when my mother developed Alzheimer's, she had remarried after my father died, and she had a very loving husband, and he became sick, and so that sort of tipped how she functioned. And she lived with my sister for a short period of time, and mother would wander, and she would wander, but she knew the neighborhood, but she would go into other people's houses to visit. And so then she went into a facility, and we were living in Wyoming at the time, and we would take her clothes down to the hall and say what she needed, and we'd go down. And she was sitting there one day, and she was crying. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, why did Mom and Dad leave me here? And so then a couple of months later, they called and said, your mother needs this, so we went out. And by then, she is the happiest person I've ever seen in my whole life. She would sit there and she would just chatter with anybody, and there was a man over, there was a man over there, and she said, you know, he drives a brand new yellow convertible. And she had hit me with her elbow, and she said, do you think he'd take us for a ride? So she went from one stage to another stage. And I don't know how long it was, because we were back and forth. How long she was in, she had just turned 90 when she died. So she was...
So, people over 85, 1 in 3 has a chance of developing dementia. And that's really, as we live longer and our bodies are healthy, in some cases our brains begin to have this disease. Now, they do say that if you get dementia, you've had it already for 20 years before there's any symptoms present. So they say that as well. So how they prove it, I don't know, and how they're going to fix it, I don't know. But the longer we live, the better chance we have of ending our lives with dementia. Yes?
Aren't there some medicines, Exelon and different medicines for that?
Yes, they exist, but no, they don't help. Okay. But they're even touted as to delay the process of Alzheimer's. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. If you don't have with the same person, you don't have a control. All right, and there are plateaus. As you said before, she's in one stage and she's unhappy. Maybe they gave her Aricept or not, and we don't know whether the Aricept made her then happy, but she's not able to do other things. So none of the medicines, unfortunately, that Big Pharma is giving to all of the Alzheimer's patients have cured or prevented people from getting worse. Maybe it takes a little longer for them to get worse. And I'm not so sure whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. So far, it is really one of the most depressing illnesses you can have because there's nothing to fix it.
Do they do research into seeing if they can develop something to slow down or
Sure, and then this Seth Rogen goes to the Senate last week to talk to the Senate about getting more funding for Alzheimer's research. And they don't even sit and listen to him.
They just got up and walked away.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was
but there
depressing.
wasn't such a bad thing because he got more publicity from them not
Oh,
being there than for
That's
them
true.
having been there.
Yes, that was good.
Oh.
That was good.
But most of them just got up and walked out.
They walked out, this committee people. They didn't even send their secretaries or aides to listen. They just didn't, he was talking to an almost empty room. So, it's not easy because it's not an illness, it's not a popular illness, and it's not one that can be fixed. Now, breast cancer used to be, shh, is a shame and don't talk about it because it's women's private parts and, you know, it was all this big secret. Then they started with Komen for the Cure, they started publicizing breast cancer and made it a popular thing to raise money to help fix. All right, the same thing with prostate cancer. Shh, you know, we don't talk about genital areas, you know. And now they are doing research, and they had the PSA test, and they were trying to get men to make sure that they went to the doctor and at least got tested so that they could cure it before it killed them. So that with Alzheimer's, we're still a little embarrassed about having it, about knowing about it, and it's not a popular issue. And it really needs to be, we all need to be advocates for Alzheimer's research and helping to find a cure. Thank you very much for your
Curious
attention.
about how you came up with the title for your book.
Unfortunately, you'll have to read the book to see.
Okay.
She's a wonder, isn't she?